Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to do part two of my talk, which I did in the part one on frequency, on strength training frequency, and I talked about the first study that I did where we compared a frequency of training each muscle group 3 days per week versus 1 day per week, and how we controlled for volume. And those participants did really 9 total sets per muscle group, whether it be once per week or 3 times per week. And I'll link to the study in the description below so you can view that for yourself. But the bottom line is it really didn't matter whether those participants strength trained 3 days per week, 3 sets on 3 occasions, versus all 9 sets on 1 day, and then they just exercise each muscle group once per week. Both improved in strength and lean tissue mass, statistically very similar. There were no significant differences between the groups. So now I want to talk about some of the practical application of that finding. So for most people that are engaging in strength training, what I've found over the 25 years, really 35 years of being involved in strength training is most people can practically effectively strength train 2 to 3 days per week. I mean, you start strength training more than that. I mean, sure, there's some elite athletes and bodybuilders and those type of people that may strength train more days than that for various reasons. But what I find is that you need to set up a periodization program where you vary these variables, and frequency is one of them. So if one day of strength training per week with a set volume of 9 sets, say in that first study, was just as effective as hitting 3 sets on 3 occasions, then the key here would be to vary your training. In other words, you may train at a little bit higher frequency for a period of time, maybe anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, especially if you're advanced. And then you may want to go then to a lower frequency approach. So whenever you shift your frequency, then you would be able to increase the number of sets on 1 day. So for example, in the study, they did all 9 sets for each, for whatever muscle group they were training on 1 day on the lower frequency approach. And then on the higher frequency approach, they trained 3 sets per each muscle group on 3 different occasions. They were both strength training 3 days per week. It's just that one was doing a split routine, one was doing a total body training routine. And so that, again, just that explanation describes why it's important to periodize your training, because total body training is totally different than a split routine, and they're both effective. And I think that first study shows that. It's just the body will adapt to whatever you're doing and whatever stress you're placing on the body. So, over time, we want to vary those variables, and frequency is one of those things. We want to periodize the training. Okay, so but you don't want to be changing a whole training structure every single week. Okay, because then you can't really measure progression. So what I would recommend, and the more advanced you get, the more you need to vary your training. Most of my clients here are not that advanced. We do have some advanced people, but in people that are not really advanced, you would want to stay on the same frequency of training each muscle group for a period of time, and measure their progress. If they're progressing, we may need to stay with that program a while. Okay, but the more advanced someone gets, then we need to alter these acute training variables. The problem is, a lot of times, and we as human beings, we want one set program to follow from now until the day we leave the earth, right? That's our program. That's what's exactly going to work. But we need to alter the acute training variables, and frequency is one of them. So and frequency, and then associated volume, right? Because if you go to a higher frequency approach, it's going to be very difficult to train with higher volume. Okay, and if you've watched any of my videos, I tend to err kind of on a little bit of a lower volume approach. But there's times where you do really low volume. There's times where you can go higher volume. But frequency is something you should vary. Okay, and so the first study demonstrated that a frequency of once per week versus 3 days per week, if volume or sets per muscle group is the same, results in very similar outcomes. Okay, so we would want to vary those. For instance, in that study alone, you could vary those two workout programs, and maybe follow one for 6 to 8 weeks, and then do the other program for 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, so building a periodized program where you're measuring your progress, if you're progressing, but varying those variables, I think, is very, very important. And I've been guilty of following a program, and that's the only program I do, and then only to find that once I shift and do another program, wow, all of a sudden I can tell my body's adapting again. You feel the extra stress on your body because it has to relearn a new program. Okay, and the more advanced you get, the more you may need to vary training. And tomorrow, or very soon, I will do a video on volume and ways you can vary volume. But just a little bit of a teaser, the same principle applies. You need to have a periodized program where you're varying these variables of frequency, volume, and intensity. Talk to you soon.